I will leave the house and the inheritance to my eldest son, who is my only family. Is that okay with you?
My mother-in-law said this in a calm tone, unlike her usual self. I couldn't immediately accept those words, which came out of nowhere. Since getting married, I had always been devoted to my in-laws. Unfortunately, my husband passed away, but even after that, I continued on, handling work and housework on my own, and taking care of my immobile mother-in-law. I never thought I would receive the inheritance for my efforts. In reality, I have no right to inherit my mother-in-law's estate. But after supporting the two of them with everything I had, with no word of thanks from my mother-in-law, and her telling me that everything would go to the eldest son, I couldn't help but feel distressed.
That boy has really taken good care of me since he was little.
Has her eldest son really taken good care of her? To me, it seemed like my mother-in-law was looking at him through rose-colored glasses. She started talking about the past, mentioning my father-in-law, eldest son, and husband here and there. How they had done this and that for her. But my name never came up. When she finished reminiscing, she sighed and smiled at me happily.
That's why, if that boy has any trouble with the inheritance, please let him know.
The moment I heard those words, the thread of patience that I had been holding snapped. I felt like there were no memories or emotions for me in her heart. Even the smile she gave me was for the eldest son. Before I knew it, I spoke to her in a voice colder than I could have imagined. As for the inheritance, feel free to do as you wish. I'm leaving this house. My name is Samantha Anderson. I'm 32 years old. I'm a working housewife. My husband, Richie, is the same age as me. We were university classmates. We met in the university's astronomy club and hit it off. After that, we exchanged contact information, spent more time together, and started dating. Being with Richie, who is kind and serious, was always a joy. We began dating in our first year of university. We kept dating and got married after graduating. Richie started working at a company dealing with telescopes and other precision equipment. He was so happy when he got the job, feeling like a dream had come true. On the other hand, I took a job as a medical office assistant, and while I was busy with work and housework, we lived happily together. At first, we lived in a rental apartment, but shortly after getting married, Richie's father passed away. That's when Richie suggested we live with his mother. I had already heard from Richie that his mother's health wasn't great. His mother, Susan, had been in and out of the hospital, and although things were okay, with my father-in-law around, he had mentioned before that he was worried about her after his father's passing. So, it wasn't a completely unexpected conversation, and I had prepared myself somewhat. I didn't dislike Susan. In fact, she had always treated me kindly, even when we first met, and I had a good impression of her. Because I was also concerned about her well-being, I agreed to live together. The in-laws' house was being remodeled for the arrangement, and they said they would provide a living space for us, which made me feel more at ease. However, there was one thing that worried me. That was Richie's brother, my brother-in-law. Richie's brother, Alex, is currently unemployed. Although he graduated from one of the top universities in America, he struggled to find a job due to his social difficulties and ended up becoming a NEET after graduation. He had a few part-time jobs, but none of them lasted long, and now he had become a full-time recluse. I couldn't help but wonder if I would get along well with Alex, who was always home. It seemed like Richie and Susan had thought of that, as they had designed the house so that we wouldn't have to face Alex too often. I wondered how they managed the living expenses, but when I asked, I found out that most of it was covered by Susan's pension. It seemed that Alex also earned some income through the internet, but it was only enough for pocket money, and without his mother, their living situation wouldn't work. Though I had concerns about living together, surprisingly, it wasn't uncomfortable. I hardly interacted with Alex, and Susan didn't interfere, so we were able to live with just the right amount of distance between us. I thought things would get easier as I adjusted. That's when it happened. Susan suffered a stroke. While I helped her, distressed, I quickly called an ambulance.
Mom! Mom, stay with me.
Richie shouted, his voice trembling as if he might cry. I tried to calm him, explained the situation to the paramedics, and saw Susan and Richie off in the ambulance. Later, Richie contacted me to say that Susan had survived the stroke. I breathed a sigh of relief. When I told Alex, who had been waiting at home with me, about it, he nodded disinterestedly. I wondered why he didn't seem more concerned or happy, but maybe he was nervous about talking to me, so I didn't press him any further. Richie returned home alone from the hospital. It seemed Susan would stay in the hospital for observation.
Mom, I just hope nothing else happens.
Richie said, leaning on the table, covering his face as his voice trembled. It was the first time I had seen him so shaken. He must care deeply for his mother. On the other hand, Alex didn't change his expression. After hearing the news, he just returned to his room. A few days later, we received a call from the hospital. They wanted us to come in for a talk. Richie went to hear the details, but when he returned, his face was paler than I had ever seen. "How is Susan?" I asked, and Richie sat down heavily in a chair, looking sick, and opened his mouth slowly. It turned out that she would have permanent partial paralysis from the stroke. It was a complication from the stroke. She could return home, but she would need full-time care. Richie looked at me and, with a serious expression, asked,
I'm really sorry, but could you take care of Mom?
It was the first time Richie had ever asked me for something. Could I really take care of her? I didn't have any qualifications, so I felt a little uneasy. But Susan was like family to me. I decided to accept Richie's request.
Thank you, Samantha.
Richie thanked me over and over again, looking completely relieved. I quit my job and began taking care of Susan instead. At first, Susan was considerate toward me. She thanked me every time I did something for her, and although caregiving was difficult, I was happy to be needed by her. However, over time, her attitude started to change. She began treating me more harshly day by day. If something displeased her, she would yell at me, acting as if she were the victim. She especially began complaining about food, criticizing the meals I made with her health in mind.
This tasteless food is disgusting. You're just treating me like an old person who can't move and making me eat this.
Saying that, she would grab the salt with her free hand and sprinkle it on without permission. No matter how much I tried to stop her, she would come up with illogical explanations and refuse to listen to me. Furthermore, Susan began telling me to prepare meals for Alex as well. Alex was very picky with food, so up until now, Susan had been the one to prepare meals. While she was in the hospital, I had to buy food from stores for him, but Susan insisted that I stop doing that because it was unhealthy. Reluctantly, I asked Susan about Alex's preferences, and I decided to prepare separate meals for her and Alex. However, even Alex, after tasting my cooking, reacted the same way as Susan.
What is this? It's nothing like the food Mom makes.
Alex muttered under his breath, and I wanted to snap back at him, but I didn't want to say anything unnecessary that might get back to Susan. I continued to serve them meals, feeling frustrated. I considered talking to Richie about it, but I didn't want to burden him further after he returned home from work and helped with the housework. Still, there was one thing I did bring up to him. About Alex. Even though Susan was in this condition, Alex still refused to work. I desperately wanted him to do something, so I asked Richie if Alex was still unable to go outside. Richie seemed troubled by Alex as well, and he offered to talk to him and encourage him to start earning money for living expenses. However, Alex came up with the excuse that he couldn't work because of his social anxiety. Not only that, but he even insisted that he was earning some income. The amount he claimed to be earning was so small that it would be gone the moment Alex went to the convenience store. Richie had tried being firm with him, but Alex got defensive and stopped listening to him. I kept a smile on my face, both in front of Richie and Susan and Alex, as I continued with the housework and caregiving. It was tough, but I managed because Richie was there with me. One day, after about 5 years of living like that, the phone in the house suddenly rang. When I picked up the receiver, it was the police. I wondered what it was about and listened in, only to hear that Richie had been in a car accident. The accident had been serious, and Richie had passed away at the scene. I couldn't believe it for a while, and even during the funeral, I was somewhat detached. After Richie passed away, I truly didn't know how I was supposed to live from then on. Even after his passing, I had no choice but to continue the life I had been living. With Richie gone, I lost my source of income, so I had to find a new job, balancing work, housework, and caregiving every day. During the day, I considered asking Alex to help with Susan's care, but he would say nothing and did nothing when he came home. At least he seemed to provide meals, but those were only leftovers I had prepared in advance. He never helped with things like changing diapers or clothes, and Susan would take her frustration out on me. When I asked Alex to work if he couldn't help with caregiving, he refused, saying he was sick and couldn't go outside. Yet, he never seemed to be seeing a doctor, and I was left thinking his condition was simply laziness. I started to feel sorry for Susan, so I thought about putting her in a care facility or getting a helper to come every day, but it was financially impossible. In the end, I arranged for a helper to come twice a week, and I made sure Alex did the minimum required on the other days. Despite doing almost nothing, Alex was still considered cute by Susan. She never complained to him and blamed everything on me. I remembered that when Susan was healthier, she would bring Alex treats or give him money for no reason, being overly protective of him. I remember that whenever I tried to say even a little something to Alex, he would erupt in anger like a raging fire. I thought she just loved her first son, but I began to feel it wasn't helping Alex at all. To be honest, I was tired of Susan yelling at me every day and Alex staying holed up in his room. But, no matter what, I couldn't leave her to fend for herself. It hurt my conscience to think of abandoning her. I was exhausted from enduring their unreasonable behavior, but I kept going, trying my best to support their lives. I desperately tried to support their lives, but the situation only worsened. Especially with Susan's health deteriorating, she became even more angry and took it out on me. She would complain if something she wanted wasn't at the local store, asking me to drive to a farther one, or refuse to wear clothes I bought, saying they were too old-fashioned. No matter what I did, she was unhappy with it. Alex still refused to work. When we faced each other, he would either ignore me or complain with Susan refusing to do anything himself. This life continued for about 8 more years after Richie passed. I was nearing my physical and mental limits, and I had started to consider talking to Susan about what to do next. One day, it happened.
Samantha, I need to talk to you.
Susan called out to me. I walked over to her bed and sat down in the chair beside her. Lying on her back, Susan began speaking in a tone that was as if she were chatting casually.
Actually, I've been thinking about something. It's about this house and my inheritance.
I was a little surprised by her sudden words.
I'm not going to be around much longer. My health is failing, and who knows when something might happen. So I thought I should talk to you while I'm still clear-headed.
There was no usual sharpness in her voice. Maybe she's really suffering today, I thought. Though I had been through so much with her, seeing her so quietly in front of me made me feel uneasy. I waited in silence for her to continue. She slowly opened her mouth and continued.
As for the house and the inheritance, I'm leaving everything to Alex.
What? I couldn't help but speak out at her words. I quickly covered my mouth, but Susan was sharp.
What do you mean by what? Of course, it's obvious. Now that my husband and Richie are gone, Alex is the only family I have left. He's always taken good care of me since he was little.
Her eyes softened as she said this. Maybe she was thinking of Alex's face. Despite her gentle expression, my heart was uneasy. I knew I had no right to inherit anything. I never intended to ask for any inheritance. But after taking care of her for so long, and managing Alex's meals and laundry, I couldn't help but wonder why I wasn't even acknowledged. Susan started talking about her memories with Alex. How he did this and that for her when he was young, how he never went through a rebellious phase even as a teenager, all the ways Alex had been a good son. I listened silently, hearing her reminisce. In the stories, the names of my father-in-law and Richie came up, but my name never appeared once. When the long conversation finally ended, Susan sighed and said with a peaceful face,
That's why, Samantha, if Alex ever has trouble with the inheritance, let him know. It's probably going to be a substantial amount, so he might need help managing it. Oh, and don't tell Alex yet. I want to tell him myself.
The moment I heard those words, something snapped inside me. It felt like the last thread of patience had broken. Before I knew it, I spoke to her in a voice colder than I had ever heard from myself. I can't tell Alex anything from now on. Susan looked at me, puzzled. Her face, furrowed in confusion, filled me with a strange anger, and I spoke with a hint of frustration. As for the inheritance, do as you wish. I'm leaving this house. Please tell Alex the same. At first, she looked stunned, but then she shot me an unpleasant glance.
What's this all of a sudden? Did you think you would get the inheritance too?
I stumbled for words. I hadn't thought that far, but I had honestly wondered if there would be something for me, so I couldn't deny it quickly. Seeing my silence, Susan sighed dramatically, clearly annoyed.
I didn't think you were so greedy. Listen, first of all, as my son's wife, you have no right to inherit anything. And just because you've been doing a little housework, you think you deserve something? You're dead wrong. This house belongs to us, and you're just living here on our terms.
Her tone, so matter-of-fact, left me speechless with anger. Maybe I had been expecting too much. Maybe I was greedy. But being spoken to like this was unbearable. After Richie passed, I had done everything I could to keep things running, yet it seemed to mean nothing to her. What was I to Susan and Alex, I wondered. What have I been doing for the last 10 years? Even when terrible things were done to me, I endured because I thought it would be cruel to abandon someone who couldn't move. But that's it now. Understood. I said only those words and left the room. It seemed like Susan had something to say, but I couldn't hear what came next. I then began preparing to leave the house. Since I couldn't pack everything up immediately, I continued with the caregiving and housework as usual, slowly getting things ready. At first, Susan seemed to be watching me, but when she saw that I was acting normally, she seemed to relax and didn't say anything special. Alex also didn't seem to have heard anything from Susan. He only showed up in the living room at mealtimes, just like usual. About a week passed, and I was able to finish my preparations. On the morning I was leaving, I made breakfast as usual and waited for Susan to finish. Once she was done eating, I cleared the dishes and, with a hint of sarcasm, delivered my final words to her. I'm ready, so as I mentioned before, I'm leaving. Thank you very much for allowing me to stay in this house, both you and Alex. Susan looked at me with a stunned expression. I grabbed the bags I had packed and made my way to the front door. I half expected her to say something, but there were no words from her. As I left, I glanced at Alex. He had stopped holding his chopsticks and was looking at me, but his gaze was full of disdain. He probably didn't believe I was serious. I left the house and headed to my own family's home. My mother lived alone, and I had already explained the situation to her. She welcomed me warmly. I set my bags down in the room my mother had prepared for me and took a deep breath. We spent the day chatting about trivial things. My mother didn't bring up anything about my in-laws, and I was able to relax, spending time with her like old times, which helped heal my wounded heart. The next day was a holiday. I woke up later than usual and checked my phone, only to find a large number of missed calls from the morning. The caller was Alex. We had exchanged contact information since we had lived together. Even as I was deleting the call history, more calls came in. Reluctantly, I answered the phone, and Alex's shouting voice immediately blasted into my ear.
Hey, where are you? Come back and take care of Mom. Also, make me something to eat. I'm starving.
His tone sounded like an angry child, and I sighed. In contrast to Alex's shouting, I responded clearly. I couldn't believe he was older than me. I'm not going back to that house. It seems I wasn't recognized as family by either you or Susan. Alex immediately shouted back.
It's true, you're not family. We're not even blood related.
It may be true in terms of blood relation, but family and relatives aren't just about blood ties. I held back the urge to fall into despair and spoke honestly. Maybe it was for the best that someone who isn't blood related left the house. You and Susan have treated me terribly. I must have been a bother to you both, right? You must be relieved now. Alex didn't respond right away. There was a long silence. Eventually, I heard Alex's voice again, but this time it was much softer, lacking the earlier anger.
Why are you being so cold? Without you coming back, neither Mom nor I can manage.
I knew Alex could at least take care of the basics of life on his own. It was clear to me now how little he had ever done for himself. I gripped my phone tightly, took a deep breath, and began speaking. I've been taking care of Susan for 10 years, including all the housework. After Richie passed away, I continued working and doing the caregiving and housework. But I've never been thanked once. Instead, I've been shouted at, ignored, treated coldly and harshly. I paused for a moment. Alex didn't interrupt. This is just like being a housekeeper. And not even getting paid, doing all this for free. I wasn't at that house to be a housekeeper. I don't want to feel miserable anymore. That's why I'm leaving. I said each word slowly, letting them sink in, and then, from the other end of the phone, I heard some grumbling sounds. It seemed like he had no response. After a while, Alex spoke up in a desperate tone, but still with a condescending attitude.
You've been rambling on about all these complicated things. Just come back already. I'll handle the food with store stuff. Just take care of Mom.
Even in this situation, he still tried to pass the responsibility of taking care of Susan onto me. It seemed like he could only think about himself. Or maybe he was just overwhelmed by doing anything for the first time in his life. I thought I might make him angry again by saying something, but the words that had been brewing deep inside me came out. Alex, it's time to face the reality. Please start working. If I'm not there, there won't be anyone bringing in money for the house, and you really won't be able to survive. If you're worried about Susan, you need to step up and take care of her. Alex seemed stunned by my sudden words of advice. The other end of the line went silent. There wasn't even any growling. Maybe he was starting to reflect on his actions. I thought, but people don't change that easily. Alex protested with a dissatisfied voice.
Shut up. Why do you think you can boss me around? And I'm sick. I can't go outside because I'm sick. So how the hell am I supposed to work?
It seemed that Alex absolutely didn't want to do either caregiving or work. If he hated it that much, maybe he didn't have to do it. That's what I thought when dealing with Alex. Maybe there's a life where you do nothing, gain no experience, and just grow older. I tried for a brief moment to engage with him properly, but it seemed like it was a lost cause. Ignoring Alex's continued shouting, I ended the call. At that point, I felt nothing more for Alex. For a while, my phone kept ringing with calls from him, but I ignored every one. Once the weekend was over, work would start again. I reminded myself to switch gears and get back to my routine. A week later, one day. While checking the belongings I had brought, I realized I had left the photo album with pictures of my husband at my in-laws' house. I hesitated to go there, but it was a precious album filled with memories of my husband. I made up my mind and decided to go back to the house. Using the spare key I had kept, I unlocked the door and was immediately hit by a bad smell. I covered my nose and proceeded deeper into the house. In the hallway leading to the living room, there were piles of garbage bags left abandoned. Alex couldn't even manage to take out the trash properly. I was about to head up to my room when I suddenly bumped into Alex, who was coming downstairs. When he saw me, his eyes widened, then immediately turned into an angry glare as he rushed down the stairs.
You're late. How long are you going to sulk? Hurry up and take care of Mom in the house. And get rid of this trash. It smells.
Alex pointed angrily at the bags of garbage. Despite the fact that a grown man was yelling at me, strangely, I didn't feel scared at all. I walked past him and started heading upstairs. But then he grabbed my arm from behind.
Don't ignore me. Mom's over here. Come on.
He dragged me into the living room. Even though Alex was reclusive, he was stronger than me, and I couldn't match his physical strength. When the living room door opened, a horrible scene unfolded before me. The stench was even worse than in the hallway, the air damp and heavy, the floor littered with things, and there were stains I couldn't even identify. At the far end, my mother-in-law was lying in bed. She looked severely weakened, clearly in bad shape. It was only natural since she hadn't been properly taken care of. Actually, after I left the house, I received a call from the helper. She told me that Alex had requested to reduce the frequency of visits to once a week. When she asked why, he reportedly made a sarcastic comment about the cost. The helper was concerned about Susan's condition, but Alex insisted that he would take care of her on the other days, so she agreed to reduce the number of visits. The helper knew that Alex was always at home, so she decided to reduce the number of visits accordingly. However, when she saw that Alex wasn't actually providing care and that the house was becoming more and more neglected, she suggested either returning to the original number of visits or increasing them if caregiving was too difficult for him. However, it seems that Alex didn't like this and became angry. So, the helper reluctantly continued with the once-a-week visits. Still, she was concerned, so she decided to call me. I thanked her for her concern and reassured her that I would talk to Alex, so she shouldn't worry. At first, I planned to observe the situation for a while. but when I went back to retrieve the photo album, it ended up bringing me back to the house. Being pulled by Alex, I stood by Susan's bed. She slowly turned her head toward me and stared at my face for a while. It seemed like she didn't recognize who I was. Maybe her cognitive functions had deteriorated. Eventually, she opened her mouth, but no words came out right away. After a few attempts to move her lips, she began to speak in broken sentences.
Hurry up, do something, apologize, to me and Alex.
It seemed she could no longer speak normally. But even with her struggling to speak, her words were still complaints directed at me. Even in this condition, she didn't apologize once. All that came out were words of blame toward me. If it had been the old me, I might have felt sorry for her, seeing her so weakened. But now, I didn't have the emotional capacity to feel that way. The person who needs to do something about this situation is Alex, not me. Please ask your beloved Alex to help you. I said this, then pushed Alex's hand away and left the living room, heading upstairs. When I entered my old room, it had also been turned into a garbage dump, but the album was still in its original place. I wiped off the dust and hugged the album to my chest, at which point Alex, who had followed me, glared at me.
What's with that attitude? You saw how Mom is, right? Hurry up and at least feed her. She won't eat the takeout I got from the store.
I couldn't even be bothered to respond. As I pushed past Alex, who was standing in the doorway, and left the room, he looked at me with a surprised expression. Alex looked surprised, and as I tried to go down the stairs, he reached out to stop me.
Wait.
I dodged his hand, descended the stairs, and headed straight for the front door. Alex hurriedly chased after me.
You heartless person. You're going to abandon me and Mom? Richie is probably looking at you from his grave, shaking his head.
Alex's words made me stop dead in my tracks as I was about to open the door. Don't you dare speak of Richie. I almost let the words slip out, but I held them back, and instead, I decided to share something else. By the way, I forgot to mention something. Susan said she was leaving all the inheritance to you. She said it would be quite a sum.
What?
Alex's eyes widened. I smiled at him, then left the house, leaving Alex standing there in shock. A month later, I noticed a huge number of missed calls on my phone, and when I checked the name, it was Alex. I was curious, so I answered, and immediately, his furious yelling filled my ears.
You liar. What are you going to do about this?
At first, I had no idea what he was talking about, but after listening to him for a while, it turned out that Alex had misunderstood the entire situation and was now in deep trouble. Alex had apparently thought that the inheritance was already his and that he was free to spend it however he liked. Apparently, Alex started gambling without even thinking about how much inheritance there was. Of course, he lost a lot, but because he thought there was a large inheritance, he expected the money for his debts to be automatically withdrawn from the account. However, later on, a debt collection notice arrived addressed to Alex. Panicking, he checked his account and found that while there was some savings, it wasn't the huge amount of money he had imagined. Confused, he called me to ask what had happened.
You said it would be a significant amount, but there's nothing left. What's going on?
I was frustrated by his tearful voice, but I explained things to him. First of all, there's almost no cash inheritance left. And of course, that makes sense. Alex hadn't been working, so where would the living expenses be coming from? A normal life isn't that easy to sustain on just a pension. When Susan mentioned that it would be quite a sum, she was likely referring to the value of the house and land if they were sold. Indeed, considering the size and location of that house, it would bring in quite a bit of money. But it seems that Alex didn't think that far ahead. After hearing my explanation, Alex was left speechless. I waited, holding my phone to my ear, for his next words. Eventually, Alex began to whine, his voice trembling, and started blaming me.
Why didn't you tell me properly? This is your fault. Take responsibility and pay off all my debt. Come back to the house and do everything like work, housework, and caregiving as penance.
It seemed that neither Susan nor Alex had any sense of reflection or regret. They always believed they would be taken care of, and thought that by being forceful, I would just comply. It's you, Alex, who misunderstood and spent money recklessly. You're reaping what you sowed. It's about time you start working and earning money. Don't forget to keep up with the housework and caregiving. Alex, clearly angry at my words, hung up the phone for the first time. It seemed like he might have quit every job before, just like he was doing now, based on his emotions in the moment. I didn't think anyone should be forced to endure, but I felt Alex needed to learn some self-discipline. 3 days later, I got another call from Alex. I answered, expecting more of the same, and Alex started crying, begging me to lend him money. It was probably because the debt collectors had contacted him again. But honestly, I couldn't care less. When I told him I couldn't lend him any money because there was no way to repay it, Alex kept crying and pleading with me over and over. Reluctantly, I told him I would head to the house tomorrow, and Alex thanked me. It might have been the first time Alex had ever thanked me. The next day, when I visited my in-laws, Alex appeared at the door with a pleading look on his face.
You brought the money, right?
His eyes gleamed with hope as he asked, and I silently handed him a paper bag. Alex snatched it from me, peering inside. The moment he looked in, all the confidence drained from his face. He froze, still staring into the bag. I couldn't bring money, but I brought something that might help you get money. Inside the paper bag were free newspapers with job listings. Alex, expecting to find stacks of cash, turned pale when he saw the papers. I smiled at him, just like I used to.
Such money. Money is?
Did I say I'd bring money? Alex looked utterly defeated and slumped to the floor. The paper bag dropped from his hands, scattering the newspapers across the floor. I picked them up, neatly folded them, and placed them back in the bag beside him. After encouraging him, I left the house. You can do it, Alex. When I looked back, Alex was still sitting there, defeated. After that, Alex never bothered to find work and ended up selling the house and land to make some money. They tried looking for a new place to live, but they could only afford an old apartment, over 50 years old, and are now dealing with issues like bugs and drafty rooms. Even with all that effort to raise money, Alex still couldn't pay off his debts and spends his days shaking in fear from the calls and demand letters. Finally, Alex ran out of savings and, struggling to make ends meet, he went to apply for welfare. However, when it became clear that Alex had no intention of working, his application was rejected. He begged the staff to accept this application. It never happened. In the end, the living expenses were covered solely by Susan's pension. Additionally, due to the accumulated overdue payments for the helper, their contract was terminated. The responsibility for Susan's care fell to Alex, but her condition only worsened, and she eventually became unable to even sit up. They couldn't afford to put her in a care facility due to the debts, so Alex had no choice but to help her with every movement. But even in that situation, Alex still didn't provide proper care for her. He didn't help her get dressed, gave her a bath only once a week, and fed her unhealthy store meals without considering her health. Because of this, Susan's condition deteriorated to the point where even maintaining her life became a struggle. If Susan were to pass away, I wondered what Alex would do then. I couldn't help but think about it. Would he come crawling back to me again? Part of me was curious, but I shook my head and pushed the thought away. Whatever happens to them, it's no longer my concern. They never cared about me. After that, I began living alone. I worked hard, found new hobbies, and made friends I could talk to. Now, I am surrounded by kind people and feel very happy. I want to live my life, cherishing the connections I have with others, never forgetting to appreciate those who treat me well, and helping each other along the way.